All right. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Good. Welcome to the Francis Moody Newman Distinguished Lecture Series, and we're delighted to have you here this evening. My name is Peter Frumkin, and I'm the director of the RGK Center for Philanthropy and Community Service here at the University of Texas. If you're unfamiliar with our work, the RGK Center's mission is to build knowledge about nonprofit organizations, philanthropy, and volunteerism, and to prepare students and practitioners like yourselves to make effective contributions to your community. At the center, we offer 30 courses here at the University of Texas on nonprofits all across campus. We offer executive education programs for practitioners to build strategy and leadership skills. We operate a social innovation competition that awards a $50,000 cash prize to students who come up with the biggest and best idea for a new charitable social purpose organization. And we also have international exchange programs with universities throughout Mexico to enhance understanding of civil society. I hope you get to know our work better after tonight and visit our webpage where all of this is spelled out in great detail. Tonight, we're launching our new lecture series entitled My Values, My Philanthropy, which is generously sponsored by the Moody Foundation in Galveston. With this lecture series, we're hoping to provide a forum to discuss how individual values shape philanthropy and ultimately the world. Our very special guest tonight to kick off this lecture series, which will be an annual event, is Linda Biehl, who co-founded the Amy Biehl Foundation with her late husband Peter in 1994 after the tragic death of their daughter. Linda has built a constructive legacy from personal despair and turned to a successful model for philanthropy to address social justice issues in South Africa and in the U.S. Linda has become internationally known for embracing the power of forgiveness as a force for personal transformation and social change. Linda is here with a special guest tonight to talk about her own values and her own experiences with giving. Please join me in giving a warm Austin welcome to Linda Biehl.
Thank you. Wow, I didn't know we were the kickoff. Thank you. I haven't been to Austin for many, many years, but it's great to be here. My son is a O-line football coach at his old high school, part-time, in Newport Beach, California. So I will have to tell him I saw the Longhorn Stadium. Thank you for having me here this evening. I'm going to ask a question to begin with, if I may. Is there anyone here from South Africa? Has anyone been to South Africa? We have a few. My story and the story of the Amy Biehl Foundation here in the U.S. and the Amy Biehl Foundation Trust in South Africa is deeply rooted in the context of South Africa. So you're going to hear stuff about South Africa whether you want to or not. I think those of you who have been there, though, will agree that it is an amazing country and that many people who go there and experience it once tend to want to go back and understand things more deeply or just visit those amazingly beautiful game parks. I do not go to game parks. I've never been to a game park. But I have found most of the beauty that I see in South Africa in the hearts of the people of South Africa. So because my story is really rooted in the loss of my daughter, Amy, I have to tell a bit of the story to bring you on board, I think. Amy was the second of our 4 children, and my husband, by the way. I will say I and we and me and I, because my husband did pass away of colon cancer about 6 years ago. So there was sort of, different time frames. But Amy lost her life in South Africa as a Fulbright scholar back in August of 1993, August 25th, 1993. And I could tell you a lot about Amy. I believe University of Texas has an excellent swimming and diving program. Amy was the captain of the Stanford diving team, and they won the NC2A championships, and I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Texas. I don't remember all those details, but I've actually was at Stanford and saw her compete against the University of Texas. Anyway, Amy was the second of our 4 children, and she was a force to be reckoned with from very young. She totally believed in education as a very young person. When her sister, a year and a half older, was in kindergarten learning to read, Amy says, "I can do that too." She just kind of pushed us all. She wanted to graduate from high school with straight A's, and she did. And if she couldn't get a calculus problem in the middle of the night, the whole house would shake. We always knew what was kind of going on with Amy because she also was a great communicator. I'm not going to read this tonight, but I have a little thing that every once in a while I read to young people, and it was in her high school diary about breaking her pain barrier when she was swimming. And at the end, she said, "My stroke quickens, and I develop a comfortable rhythm that continues until the end of the set. I feel fantastic. So many people won't even try to reach such a point, but I try as often as I can do so ever since I experienced that first broken barrier, and I've had to reach it again and again and again. I can't get enough." She wrote that when she was like a sophomore in high school. So our foundation, as I said, really was rooted in her interest and her causes. And as a Stanford student, her cause became South Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. Her honors thesis, her senior year at Stanford in 1989, was, One Man's Role in Foreign Policy, and it was about the independence of Namibia. Now, I know South Africa, but Namibia, but she pulled us into all that. So her first trip to Africa, to Namibia, was in 1989. She came home and she was so engaged with, "Mom, the women were in the struggle, but then when their parliament took over, where were the women?" And so we were brought in by Amy. She worked for the National Democratic Institute of International Affairs in Washington, D.C. for several years in the early 90s. She did such things as Ron Brown, former Secretary of Commerce, briefing papers to South Africa. She worked at a pretty high level. And when she was in African countries working in emerging democracies for NDI, she met a lot of the South African leadership who hold office today, or who were important in their struggle. And they said, "Amy, you've got to come to South Africa. We're about to have some amazing history. We are working really hard towards our free elections." So she applied for a Fulbright grant, and her grant was basically on women's role in the transformation process. And she decided to locate her Fulbright work in the non-white university in Cape Town, South Africa. Everything was 80%. You guys go to the non-white schools if you can get in, and you guys, the 20% over here, can go to the white schools. That's the way it was. She felt she needed to be where the action was happening. So in October of 1992, I put her on a plane, and that's the last time I saw her. She was due to come home in August, a few days actually after her death. She was given a Jacob Javits Fellowship to get her PhD, and that was going to be centered at Rutgers University. But sometimes things happen that one doesn't predict will happen, and they're not always something that we would want to happen. But that very day, in some ways, Amy gave me a gift. And so I hope that our story of our foundation will help you understand that it's a gift that keeps on giving in many ways. When someone dies, I hadn't experienced a lot of death in my life, but when someone dies, people often send you money, or where can I send something? So some people sent money to Stanford for a fellowship. Some people sent money to NDI in Washington, where she had worked in the nonprofit. So all of a sudden we had in our house, in the weeks and months following Amy's death, stacks of checks, some of them $20. So we ended up starting to call our foundation the Foundation of the $20 Giver. We put it in the bank. And in 1994, a lawyer friend said, we'll start a 501c3. Okay, sort of, that was happening. Also, upon her death, we received phone calls, faxes, email wasn't quite where it is today, from people in South Africa. Even people that had no access to phone or fax, but lived in the very community where she lost her life. They found a fax office, or they wrote letters, or whatever. They said, when are you coming? When are you coming to South Africa? When are you and the family coming to see what your daughter was involved in? Well, a lot of people thought we were absolutely crazy to even think about going to South Africa. There were a lot of people who said to my husband, how can you take your family over there after what happened to your daughter? Shouldn't you be afraid? We sat down as a family the first night after we learned about Amy's death, and we were all over the country. My one daughter was in D.C., my husband was in the Seattle area. All got together and said, what are we going to do just to react to what happened? And we had to say, we have to dig down deep. We cannot be people that say we support something, but if it happens to us, say, oh no, it happens to other people and they should do this. And we said, no, we have to decide. We had to figure out how to show our love and respect for Amy and for the people of South Africa that were involved in this incredible struggle for freedom. The liberation movements were winding down some of the violence, but Amy sort of came at the tail end of that. And Tobacco will tell you some about that. But basically, we went to South Africa about 6 weeks after Amy was killed. And we were not taken to the game parks and the fancy, beautiful restaurants or the beaches. We were taken into the communities where people lived in shacks with no running water, no electricity. But everywhere we went, even though we kept hearing over the news, blacks hate whites, we would walk into these communities and people would just embrace us. The big mamas, right, Tobacco? Can I use that without being offensive if I say that? But they referred to themselves as mamas, and they would squeeze you so hard. You've never been squeezed like that before. And they said, this shouldn't have happened to your daughter here. But we need help. We need help? Our family's like, what can we do as a family? How can we help? So they marched us into different schools in these black townships that had fences, cyclone fences with razor wire around them, and no books. They had maybe a blackboard, and the teacher would stand up there with their stick. There was still corporal punishment in South Africa, really, until a few years ago. So they would say, we don't have any books, and our copy machine is broken. And we have one book, and we like to copy it for our kids. We need a new copy machine. Oh. It was like, come on, give us a copy. So here we were. What do we do with all this? We were there for about 3 weeks, and almost everywhere we went, people said, come and help. And when we went home, we were really processing an awful lot. And I think my first real concern was to make sure that my 3 other children, because my son was the youngest, he was a junior, just ready to start his junior in high school, would get through this without being crippled for life, without being victims. So I really thought we would go back to the States and, spend some time with that process. But the faxes and the letters didn't let up, and we kind of partnered with some organizations, NGOs, nonprofits, community-based organizations, which are a big part of South Africans' life. And we thought, well, we'll bring some money over to these organizations, right? Okay, that sounds good. We did that for a few years. But then a very interesting thing happened. The U.S. Agency for International Development got in touch with us, and they said, we know that you're doing some work in South Africa. Now, the head of USAID at that time was a man by the name of Brian Atwood, and he had been Amy's boss at NDI in the early 90s. And so it was an unsolicited grant. I know most people write for these grants. Well, it came to us, and we had to figure out what to do with it. Because if we took the initial grant, that meant our lives would be probably in South Africa most of the year. Because it was to us, but in order to get the money, we had to set up a South African nonprofit, where that was a bit of a challenge. They've gone through a lot of transition in their rules and regulations. You know, it used to be South Africans thought it was charity was about handing out, and not so much about development of people. So we went to the South African Internal Revenue Service and sent our papers, and they looked at us and said, well, no, we can't grant you this status because you're about development. We're about charity. That has changed. But in 1997, when we got our official status, we had both to learn and understand the South African laws and regulations, and also how to deal with U.S. aid money, because that's very tricky. It was a blessing and a curse. When you get government money, you really have a lot of laws to obey. Simple laws, like, okay, you have to buy, if you're going to buy a car with our money, it has to be new and American made. Now, we don't necessarily want to drive into townships and do our work in a new American car. You want like a VW Combi minivan, right, Tobacco? Anyway, we learned a lot, and we were good partners with USAID. The other problem when you get government money like USAID, it's in the newspaper and you've got your picture taken with somebody handing you a check. Everyone thinks you're really rich, and everyone comes to you and they want money. Okay, that's another problem. At times we had people lined up at our office, our little office door, our first office in Cape Town. They would call on the phone, Mr. and Mrs. Biehl, we need to see you. I said, yes, what is it? No, we need to see you. We need to see you. As it turned out, everyone in that particular January was there. They had spent all their money over their Christmas holiday season, and they had no money left for their kids' school uniform or school fees. So it was, we made a lot of mistakes. But we also did a lot of amazing research, and we had access to people at the government level, high government level in South Africa, but our real knowledge and learning, and the most wonderful part of all this process was sitting in homes of people in their communities, particularly Guguletu, which was the township where Amy was killed. Teachers in their 60s, wonderful women who said, our kids used to have skills. We used to have a lot more family values. But the struggle to liberate our country sort of broke families apart, took some of these values away. We would like to restore some of these values. We want after-school programs where our kids can be safe. We want our kids to have access to what the white kids have had access to. Can you help us? So we did devise sort of a holistic approach to helping the people in these areas to help themselves learn how to do things like manage money. People who have never had a checking account in their life, and if they had a checking account, so much of it was taken away by the almost usury type fees by the South African banks. If they were paid in cash, then people across the fence might be watching, and they would be, hit, as they say. The money would be taken from them. So there was all these really difficult things, and I could do some very specific projects if we had about 2 or 3 weeks, running a bakery, training people, having a little construction and training thing with welding and all this kind. All of these things, and here we were, these outsiders, these Americans. Do we do it? Do we not do it? But I'll tell you why we did it, and then I'm going to have Tobacco talk to you a little bit, because along all of this course of action, so to speak, there was another thing happening in that country. It was all about restoring or trying to promote harmony, to heal all of the wounds, or to promote healing, I should say. No one could ever expect that all these wounds for so many centuries of oppression, and in particular the formal apartheid from 1948. So a Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up. And it was headed by Archbishop Tutu, Nobel Peace Laureate, and I think he gave a nonpartisan credibility to it. And there were many different aspects, and we won't take the time necessarily to go into all that, but one part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was about amnesty. Now, how do we get involved in that, and why is Tobacco here? So we'll have to backtrack again a little bit. Well, Amy was having great opportunity in her life. There were thousands and thousands of young people like Tobacco here who were fighting for liberation for their country. They started as very small children in their primary schools. When their high schools were going out marching and trying to instigate political action in their communities, even as a 6, 7, 8-year-old, the little kids in the primary schools were let out of school because it was dangerous, or then they were supposed to go home. Did they go home? No, they stayed and watched. Did they get tear gassed? One of the first things he says is that they learned to carry Vaseline with them, and they would put Vaseline on their eyes and nose and mouth. Is that right? Keep going. He's my critic here, so to keep the tear gas. And then daily, they saw their comrades, friends, neighbors getting shot by the police. That's how he was growing up, while Amy was having these opportunities. Well, when Amy lost her life, it was in a situation where many young men, hundreds of young men, like Tobacco, were doing their daily activities in the townships. They were students by day in their school uniforms, but they had been trained as political, from their political movement, as really soldiers. And in their training, it was kind of guerrilla warfare to me. That's how I would describe it. And they were taught to make bombs. They were taught how to use guns, even though ammunition was limited. They were making the townships ungovernable, destabilizing things. Does that happen anywhere else in the world today? Yeah. So this was there, and we're not going to go into all the philosophies of the Pan-African Congress, which was the movement he was part of, because it gets kind of detailed. But it was amazing the skills that these young people had. And there came a point where their leadership thought they were causing problems in the township, but it ended up being black policemen coming in, and so black on black violence. So a decision was taken to take the violence to the beneficiaries of apartheid, and those were the white people, the 20% of the population. So in their year of the Great Storm, they went to swimming pools, golf courses, restaurants, bars, churches even. A month before Amy was killed, some of his comrades went to St. James Church in Cape Town, South Africa, shooting AK-47s. So there was a church that was divided even in how to deal with forgiveness and reconciliation. But in any event, Tobacco and 3 others eventually were arrested, or as in his case, he turned himself in. They were tried by the South African court system, and they were sentenced to 18 years of murder and public violence. We, as an American family, said, this is South Africa's justice system. We did not participate with any legal people, or actually we really didn't even we didn't concentrate on that. But then press kept calling us. So what do you think about the trial? What do you think about this? So again, we were kind of drawn in a little bit. But in 1997, and because so much had to be done to heal this nation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission started some of their amnesty hearings. About 22,000 people came before the commission in some way to either find out what happened to their loved ones, or to try and get amnesty if they hadn't even committed a crime. Maybe if they come forward and confess and disclose what happened, they might not ever be arrested for their crimes. There were crimes committed by all the political movements in the country. About 16,000 people were killed it could have been a civil war, it wasn't. But. So the young men that were in prison, including Tobacco at that time, came forward before the committee and told the judges that were selected their story, and they made a full disclosure, which were checked by an investigative unit. There were about 7,000 that actually came before the commission for amnesty. Everyone thought in South Africa, a lot of the privileged South Africans particularly thought, you know what, this is just going to open the prison doors. But only about 800 were given amnesty. The judges really looked at the situations individually. Instead of the Nuremberg approach, revenge, South Africa tried to develop a restorative justice process. So our story, and the real story of the Amy Biehl Foundation, which the underpinnings of which are in keeping with the spirit of Ubuntu. Have any of you heard that word before? Lori, can you, and there's someone back there. You want to give me a definition of Ubuntu?
Me?
Yeah. I pick on people when I talk.
Oh, yeah. It's forgiveness, isn't it? Or it's understanding, or
Way back there, who had their hand up about Ubuntu.
It's pretty similar to
Do unto others, do unto yourself. Yes, and Desmond Tutu will basically say, a person is a person through other persons. And you work in harmony to restore justice. When a community, a village, take it back. When a village has a problem, the village comes together to heal the problem, restores that person to the community. So as we talked to Desmond Tutu, we were working, our programs were beginning. But they said, come to the amnesty hearing and talk about Amy and speak from your heart. So our last comments after the young men gave their statements were that we hoped these young people would be returned to their community. It was South Africa to heal itself, but we were willing to link arms and go forward. So I'm going to have Tobacco come up and tell you a little bit how we've been going forward.
Molweni nonke. A very good evening to you all. That was my Xhosa language, not Xhosa, Xhosa. Can anyone try that? Xhosa. Okay, my name is Ndobeko Penny, coming from Cape Town, South Africa. I work for the Amy Biehl Foundation Trust. After 9 years working for the Amy Biehl Foundation Trust, I'm currently now occupying a position of being a program manager. My story with this young lady, Linda Biehl, was dated back in 1993. The core value that made me to commit was commitment to the struggle for freedom. I was committed to sacrifice my life as much as other thousands of young people were committed to sacrifice their life for the benefit of the country. That kind of a value overshadows all the other values. The value of respect to life did not necessarily exist, simply because the life that we're experiencing, it was worth totally nothing, simply because black people had a separate education system than white people. We were only taught that white will always be supreme to us. Thus, it was very easy for young people to commit to sacrifice their lives to fight and change things. Having been committed to this struggle, having been involved in Amy Biehl's death, I was sentenced to 18 years in prison, as Linda have said. During my time in prison, it was time for me to reflect and look back at things and allow my experiences to challenge the being that I was when I was in prison. I had somehow come to understand that as much as I was not forced to join the movement, I chose to join that movement. And that was the last time I made a choice. Because when we were inside the movement, you had to live by the oath of allegiance of that movement. But quietly, simply because I was only allowed 1 hour of break during the 24 hours in prison. So almost every day I had 23 hours to myself, totally to look at my own personal life. So I started to look at things totally differently, challenging the commitment, the values that I committed myself to. Of course, I could not at all be in dialogue with anyone concerning what was happening on my mind, simply because I was still under the oath of allegiance. I still had to believe under the same oath. But during that time, I started to appreciate life. I looked back and started to realize so many young people were shot and killed. I knew that was the fate. Thus, we took the oath of allegiance. So I realized I was one of the fortunate. So I very much want to believe that the value of respect to life started to come back. That all those who were shot in front of me, all those who had to bury it almost every day, they'll never come back. For me, serving 18 years in prison is nothing if I were to compare it to that. There will come a time when I go home. There will be parents who will be able not to look at me simply because when they see me, they will remember their children. I may have been responsible for recruiting some of them may have found them in a movement. So these were some of the things that were challenging me when I was sitting in prison. And of course, I had made one commitment to allow this experience to come back to me and not to be defensive. Having looked at life totally differently, I've realized that from joining the movement, I was always told what to do, when and how. When you were in its militant camps, you were always told what to do, when and how. And now here I am sitting in prison serving 18 years. Again, I'm told what to do, when and how. When am I going to get a grip in my own life and be totally in charge? So that's how I said, if my time comes and I'm out of prison, I'll live life totally differently. The time for Truth and Reconciliation Commission came. I appeared in front of the commission. The instruction that we're carrying then was not to be apologetic at all for what we've done, but we're there to explain. But when I look at the eyes of the family, when I look at late Peter, Bill, and Linda, I saw parents. But again, as I was processing that, when they showed Amy's pictures, one could have seen she had traveled to other African states. You see her in pictures with the then president of Namibia. Then you start to realize who this Amy Biehl was. She was one of my own. Had I knew, I would have not done what I've done. But again, when the family said it's not up to us as Americans to forgive, it's up to you as South Africans to forgive each other and move forward. And we hope we will be able to link arms and go forward. My initial reaction was that if I was in their shoes, there's no way I would say that statement. And my only conclusion was that Amy was not their biological daughter, there's no way. So even during the session, we were being escorted back to the prison cells. Escorted back to prison. Somehow we bumped to the family on the small corridors. They extended hands. And somehow I knew I don't deserve that hand. I never extended my hands, but 3 of my colleagues did. But I did not show them that I don't want to extend that hand. But simply because I felt shame to extend my hand to them. I was just confused. Luckily, I spent another year in prison before we were granted amnesty. But we were granted amnesty on the 28th of July, 1998. Having been released, coming outside, seeing most of the young people who I fought along with, that today they were only involved in drugs and alcohol abuse. The very same young people who sacrificed their own lives for the freedom of this country. So when I tried to understand as to why they were sitting around and not taking part integrated into a new defense force as they were eligible, and most of them were never arrested, luckily for them, if I may say that. But I said, no, there's no place for them in a new South Africa. And I was informed the new game that they were involved in Since politicians who gave us instruction were now sitting in parliament, owning houses far away from where they were staying, the instruction was that we have the skills, we have ammunition. Let's go and repossess cash and enrich ourselves. Let's use the skills that we've gained in the past for our own benefit. And then I've realized I've just served 4 years out of 18 years. I don't see myself going back. So I think, and then I realized the value of having to make that choice. When I realized the last time I made choice was when I joined this movement. Since then, I've lived by the oath of allegiance. I've had no say. The only say I had was when we're going to plan anything, that this is the best way. Other than that, I had no say. I told my former comrades that since I'm only 2 weeks out of prison, I need time to think about this. Well, this is a totally different thing than what we engaged in. I actually never went back to them to say I'm ready or not. I said, please don't visit me. When I'm ready, I'll come to you. I used that tactic simply because I knew from the past, if you're not going to be part of an operation, see to it that you don't have a slight clue of what was going to take place. Because if anything goes wrong in that mission, you are the only outsider who's aware, even if you happen to be one of us, you'll be executed. So my decision was that up until I am ready, I'll come to you, do not come to me. I've seen them driving around in fancy vehicles, designer clothing. Yes, I was tempted. I was tempted. And I was not working. But I wanted to make that choice. I was patient enough to make that choice. Having seen that things have never changed, being troubled to see other young people that did not want to necessarily engage in this new armored vehicle robberies, I sort of started a youth club where we'll take young people out of the township to go mountain climbing and hiking. Use public holidays, which are daily celebrated, to do something totally different. Let's don't go to rallies. We've been to rallies for the past 15 years. Let's do something totally different. We're not working, and sometimes, it's public holiday. Those who are working, they are not at work. So we'll go to their houses and knock and borrow their train tickets and bus tickets. So we'll all find tickets to get everyone to the downtown so that we can walk up the mountain. Running out of resources, then I saw the Amy Biehl Foundation Trust and its work, the late Peter Bill and Linda, on national television. Somehow one of the skills training centers that they were running happened to be 5 minutes away from where I'm staying. And I realized, here is an opportunity. But how do you do that? How dare you think about going to revoke those wounds? But here's a challenge again. I've started something. I do not have resources to keep this going. And every time I live in denial where I say I will not revoke their wounds, my presence will revoke their wounds. But again, in a day or two, I see them again on television. So as much as I was living in denial that they did not exist, television told me they are just 5 minutes away. So eventually we tried to make a contact, and we did. Linda was back in California, the late Peter Bill was still in Cape Town. My biggest fear was that he, as a man and as a father, he was going to take revenge. So when he agreed to this meeting, we said, in our own community, he said, fine. So when we realized he's the only person in the car, he has no escort and whatsoever, we said, well, he must be on a supreme sacrifice mission. So we need to be very careful. So we were in one of the houses. So when he walked in, I was able to frisk him through his waist area because he was wearing a rain jacket. I have to mention this. Linda knows about it. So in a way, he sat down, walked around in the house. Then you could see if someone is carrying any firearm around the waistline. But eventually he asked us more about what we were doing. He holded his tears for us to making that step. He told us he's been wondering what we are doing now that we were free. He knows what others are doing and they are not on the right path. So he was very concerned, but there was no way he was going to come to us Now that we've made that step, they open their arms. So he phones and explains, I will call my wife as soon as I leave here. The next day, Peter phoned and said, my wife is coming back in 3 days' time. She's very happy and she wants to see you as well. So from there, we accessed the Skills Training Center where we were trained in aluminium window making, welding. Some of the girls that were there, even the guys went for sewing training. It was a 6-month training course, and once you graduate on that as a team, if you want to stay as a team, there was a loan within this facility where you will loan about $1,500 to start your own small company. The Amy Biehl Foundation also assists you in terms of going out and look for business opportunities. And in a way, they will keep in the same premises so that you use their same electricity, same sewing machine without any charge. Then they'll make it a point that you also, some people are trained in how to deal with finances, how to manage the company. So people say we're trained in different structures after you complete the 6 months course. So once you're up and running, then you start to pay back that loan. So this is how these trainings were sustained. But working with the Biehl family, I was trying so hard to lead a totally different life. But for me, it was extremely difficult. Because whenever I look back, I was so ashamed of the commitment that I was involved in. As much as I was involved in the reconstruction and development of the country, providing opportunities to my own community through the Amy Biehl Foundation, I was not at peace with myself. How does one become an agent for peace if one is not in peace? So part of that forgiveness, it's one thing to be forgiven, it's something else to forgive yourself. Tomorrow someone may do something to you, said I forgive you, but the next day you see that person doing the very same thing. Before you get upset, think about it. That person may not be in a position to realize that he or she needs to find peace within. But sometimes we say sorry, while we do not mean it deeply. So this relationship for me has been wonderful. It has taken work because it has been reconciliation. If it was not for that next step of reconciliation, working very close together, today I'm able to look at Linda at any given time. We talk about anything. But if I was not in peace within myself, there's no way I'll be able to be here today. And we mainly share our story so that certain history does not repeat itself. If we're going to sit down with our own stories and not share, then we'll see that history in the future, in the same history repeating itself. Whether you are in America, you are in Iraq, you are in Iran, Afghanistan, there are certain lessons that can be learned from any other story. Today, my vein of respect for life, it's really amazing. I'm raising a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, both girls, very difficult. Because all 3 of us are Libras. Libras have this tendency to think we're always right. So I had to learn the hard way that I'm not always right. We all have choices. Linda, the family could have chosen to forgive and walk away. They made another choice after choosing to forgive. They chose to go on to reconciliation and assist in the reconstruction and development of South Africa. Thus, it assisted me to be able to make the choices that I've made today. Every time I talk to young people, especially at school level or at university, there's a lot of teasing. And I always say, when you are being teased, someone wants to put you in a totally different state. That's their goal. And if you get to that state, your responsibility is to get out of that state, because that's not where you want to be. If you stay in that state, that's where you want to be. You're no longer a victim. If anyone were to push you off that chair, you are a victim. You are a victim. But if you remain seated on that floor, you're no longer a victim. You've chosen to stay on that floor. That's not where you want to be. So these are some of the lessons that I've learned in my own life. We're hoping for more engagement. Let me not take much of the time because each audience has a very specific interest. So from there, hoping we still have enough time for questions, then we can continue in terms of dialogue. Thank you.
Linda's agreed to take questions from the audience, so I think you feel free to call on whoever you'd like.
Okay. Thank you for listening to our story. The genesis of the foundation obviously is somewhat complicated, but the programs today, I just want to add, are for youth, much like tobacco, girls too, in their townships, still where they're living. Schools haven't changed much, but to help create holistic young people that don't have to resort to crime and violence. And by doing that, it's just people like tobacco that has developed in his own community that really make the difference. Yes, we come in, and yes, we try and provide resources, and yes, I have learned and had wonderful experiences, but if it doesn't come from the community itself, it's not going to sustain itself. So we are actively engaged with a couple thousand kids every day in different programs. But we would like to hear some comments or questions. I know it's maybe a little different scenario of a foundation than others, but we also would like to open it up. So, anybody with any comments or questions? Yes, Lord.
How many different schools or how many different community programs do you have in South Africa?
You know, over the years, Tobacco has talked a lot about, our training programs, our job skill creation programs. We, as a foundation, I think, have tried to both listen to the people in the communities, and then we've also tried to be very aware of the policies of the South African government. We started out very early on having strategic planning meetings where we got a representative from Department of Social Development, now it's called, of sport, of health, of education. So we had them, maybe twice a month, meet with our community liaisons. We did that for the first couple of years, and we created a bakery. We really felt, when you have a country that many say has 40% official unemployment, that's very key. And a lot of kids weren't going to school. But the government has really gotten more and more involved in training programs. There are a lot of labor issues. And as we have seen, as the years have gone by, then we've adapted, I think, to the situation. So now more of our programs are related to helping develop better, stronger infrastructure in the schools, in these communities that don't have what the other schools have, the privileged schools, and then support the kids outside of school when they're very, very vulnerable. But it's about prevention still. We have HIV/AIDS training programs with peer educators. We have a lot of music, drama, art, sport, all of those things. And we have literacy programs. We are very concerned about the partnering with the privileged schools and the privileged community. There's still this big, I go to a Rotary Club in South Africa and they'll say, Mrs. Biehl, will you take us out to the township? 90% of the white population have never been into a township of black community. So in a way we become a facilitator. There are social responsibility mandates for businesses, for corporations, and for schools and institutions to help in this development. They don't know how to do it. So schools have been coming to us, seeing that we're not perfect, but that we kind of hang in there, and saying, look, we'll give kids in some of your programs violin lessons every Thursday afternoon. You just get them here. I won't go in to tell you how hard it is to get them there. I won't do that, but I should, because that's one of the biggest challenges. Swimming programs. University of Cape Town, give kids ballet class. So we could be offered something from one of these schools and try and be flexible enough to take that opportunity. We also are into environmental issues, greening, vegetable gardens, helping the community get involved with their kids in their schools. That's very hard to try and bridge some of those gaps. We also, in terms of community service, I want to tell you we've had hundreds of interns and volunteers, not only from the U.S., but also from Europe, who have heard about the foundation, hear that we're very grassroots. They have to want to go out in the townships. They have to feel comfortable and get opportunities to actually dig in the dirt, help the kids in our programs build a greenhouse, help them with their violin, but mostly they like to come and see the real traditional dance that the kids do. But that is a big part of our program. In fact, we really need to develop that more. It's hard for a lot of South Africans to understand that task-driven mindset of Americans coming over, because there's such thing as African time. There's such thing as, oh, I didn't know how to email, but I'm learning. You know, there are schools that Gates Foundation and other big corporates have given computer labs to, but they sit there. They sit there for 2 years because teachers don't know how to teach any computer literacy. Our interns do. They come from the States. Most of the people in our office have learned how to use or develop their computer skills because of our interns. So I would say, you know, we have sort of a core group of programs, but you never know, next year we might, I think we keep our mission is about restoring harmony in the communities, helping them to develop themselves, and as opportunities arise, we want to remain flexible enough to keep that. But it is in keeping with that spirit of restorative justice and not retributive justice or revenge. That is our spirit. Yes?
I guess I have two questions. They're not necessarily related, but I was wondering what your background and you and your husband's background was, and if there was any experience in this sort of thing at all. And then secondly, what was your level of knowledge about race relations and this sort of thing prior to going to South Africa, other than what your daughter told you, or was that the experience?
You know, my husband and I were history majors, and I think it was more in the era of Cold War, but we always had an interest in international activities. My husband was an international business consultant, a lot in the food industry and all, but he worked in Mexico, I worked in the Far East, and so we did, I think, have an international, a little bit of an internet, he did more than I. I was the ultimate volunteer mom for many years. I was probably on this committee and that committee. My real love was art history. We did have an art gallery in Santa Fe for about 6 years. Ran that. And what I learned there, living in Santa Fe with Hopi and Navajo Indians, I learned about traditional medicine. I learned about the worship of the ancestors. Everything that his culture, I cannot do that, is so similar. It was so similar that I actually found so much more relationship between our Native American populations in a lot of those, like dealing with HIV/AIDS. Do you accept Western medicine in South Africa? And if you accept it, does your traditional medicine still work? That's what I learned just as kind of in this art gallery, because I dealt with Hopi and Navajo artists. Race relations, yes, I think we were very taken aback. I think our first trip to South Africa, it had a sense of revolution. When we went in these communities and were greeted by people, it brought me back to the 60s. I kept thinking about our own history, our civil rights history, and amazingly enough, this year we've been talking to schools around Martin Luther King's birthday when Tobacco's been here, and the 40th anniversary of his assassination. Tobacco used to, when he heard about our civil rights movement, that it was too soft. So we're going to get a Malcolm X's book and a few other things. Black Panther. But basically, when you're talking about peaceful movements, versus, that's a whole other thing. But I think we were aware. Our family was the kind of family that we did read the newspapers every day. We did keep abreast of activities. My kids as well. But to be honest with you, Amy never stopped talking. If something happened to her, she said, black people were killed in numbers in South Africa. 10 killed here, 20 killed there. If something happens to me, I'd rather be a number than a name. And ironically, it was her name. We weren't going to name the Amy Biehl Foundation the Amy Biehl Foundation at first, because we were quite understanding in sort of, you know, in unity with that thought. But even her friends who said that and knew she said that said, in South Africa, no, you must name it the Amy Biehl Foundation. So that was something we dealt with as well.
At some point, you made the decision to be an agent for change, an agent for peace, and to forgive. And my question is personal. I want to know, how easy was this for you? It seems to be sort of innate. And I want to preface this with saying that my brother was killed in Iraq. And I've struggled with the feelings of anger, and I'm not to a point where I'm ready to forgive. And I want to know if that is something that came easily for you, or if along the process did you have moments or days or weeks where you struggled with your commitment to be an agent for change?
Well, that's a hard question. I don't know how I would react if my son were killed in Iraq. I honestly don't. I think my daughter Molly summed it up best the night we all got together that night after we heard about Amy, and we had satellite TV in front of our house, and we had to respond. What do we do? And Molly just said, you know, Mom, this thing is bigger than we are. The South African Long Walk to Freedom, which is the name of Nelson Mandela's biography. I think we had to take that walk, and I think we knew that very early. We knew Amy had freed Nelson Mandela on her graduation cap from Stanford in 1989. Okay, we are going to have to do this. So I think once we really reconciled within ourselves that we were going to support a country going forward, it became easier. And when we heard leaders speak, like Mandela, like others who said, you know, the white leadership in South Africa's job was to make us be bitter, and we're not bitter. It was those kinds of examples that we looked to get us through as well. That helps a little bit. You want the answer?
Linda, what's the foundation's budget here and in South Africa, and where does your funding come from?
We had USAID funding until the end of 2005, and during that time we probably had a total of about $7 million from USAID. We tried to match that as best we could. And in those days, we were trying to develop businesses like bakeries to not only provide bread and jobs, but also some sustainable income, and we're still working on some of that. You know, to be quite honest, most of the money we raise here goes to South Africa. Our work here in the U.S., I think now, has been more in the restorative justice and the sharing of the stories, and not program. Program is what we run in South Africa. Our annual budget this year and last year, it's been, I think, you know, like $500,000. And a lot of that now is beginning to come from South Africans. Yes. So I have a manager now. My managing director in South Africa replaced my dear Kosa teacher and more educational-oriented man who died of diabetes a year and a half ago. Now I have a white man in his mid-40s who was 25 years with First National Bank, which is a part of Barclay, I think, originally, in Cape Town. He was a trustee, because I don't like fancy boards that make it difficult. I like a banker. This is in South Africa, who can help me with the absorbing of bank fees, cut those. I like a lawyer where I get pro bono fees, because there are a lot of labor issues. So we have a very working board, and this particular man, Kevin Chaplin, was a trustee and he got involved in the foundation, he also saw a need for more work in the community because he worked with large corporates. He worked with the international, what's the word? The consulates and all that. And he saw issues, and he was actually going to start his own foundation, bringing some of the politicians and stuff, calling it the Ubuntu Foundation in Cape Town, to develop that. And then he saw that when Solomon passed away, there was a niche. Now, he doesn't know anything about the communities. He didn't grow up knowing that. But I have to tell you, we have free rent. We have a free vehicle from a Toyota from Reed's Motors in Cape Town. When they saw me coming, they wouldn't give me anything free. They'd say, Mrs. Biehl, this is how much, write me a check for this. So that has been a huge shift, and I am stepping back from some of that. And our biggest issue is payroll, because people like Tobacco and many others who didn't have the skills and the opportunity to develop during their years as young activists are now employed, and that is also job creation. And so I am stepping back, and I'm trying to let the South African Foundation create its own budgets and not pushing at it. Last year, I wasn't sure we were going to make it, and we made it at the end of the year. And I think we did, bring in about $500,000. I would like to be able to tell you we have this perfect budget in order for this year, but it's challenging. In the U.S., I'm hoping now that I'm having more opportunity and people have the skills to run the programs and whatnot. I'm looking at probably doing more partnership. I am very interested in a lot of the gang issues today. I'm currently a Greeley Peace Fellow for the month in Lowell, Massachusetts for the UMass system, learning about Cambodian gangs. I've started to go into East LA a little bit, and to be a facilitating organization here. And that time I will let you know what my budget is when I write that.
You brought up the Hopi traditional medicine, and that just reminded me. I don't know if you could speak more about the programs that you do have in South Africa. What focus, if any, is it in incorporating the tradition? I don't know, the traditions of South Africa. I guess traditional culture. You spoke about the music and the dance and the literature, and then you were talking about ballet, and I was just wondering if
there are so many people working in the townships, and there's these talented kids. So, for instance, we have each of our after-school programs has very strong traditional dance, drumming, marimba, and stuff, but there's an organization called Dance for All. It's been working in the townships of Cape Town, and they have created kids that are going to England to study dance. These are the opportunities that kids need. We would like to have a little larger extended group. Oprah School, for instance, she has a $40 million school with 150 students for leadership. Of course, our programs, I think, are in keeping with the struggle, getting it to the masses, and then helping direct them into some of these more specific things. Young blacks in the music program sing opera. In their townships, they sing opera. I go out there and they're singing Italian opera. And I think I've had people we often bring U.S. congressmen over. Tobacco had Barney Frank and Maxine Waters on a tour a couple of weeks ago. And, people come over and they want to see these little kids, and they love the traditional dance and the drumming, but you know what? Those little kids are never going to get anywhere. So how do you keep their culture? How do you keep their language? These are all problems that South Africa is having. So I think we've tried to combine both. You want to speak to that? Do you want to?
Yeah, we're very much of people who are traditional. In terms of traditional dance, we're more choral and not instrumental. But there are more opportunities if people are exposed to instrumental music. because through that they could take those as, in our schools we don't have any music lessons in the township. But if you go to any other schools, there's music lessons. So now we're trying to get them ready so that when such opportunities come, they are ready for those. We don't just teach them instrumental music, we give them a 3-year theory lessons. And the first instrument that we're able to afford, it's a recorder. And kids say, we're sick and tired of this instrument. And sometimes we get trombones and trumpets and saxophones, and there are very few, because those are highly expensive instruments. And we don't buy those. We ask for people if they have any stored away instruments that they could ship to us. People do that. So if we get 5 trumpets and we've got 15 kids we can't help, they have to be taught around those 5 instruments. So exposing them to that particular culture, because it's no longer going to be, it's no longer a white culture, but it's an integration of society. We're all going to bring our cultures, making one culture. So if we prepare them and expose them, as much as they're still in the township, but we expose them to another life, because those are the next opportunities. Those are doors that are opening up for them. Because now we've partnered up with private schools. Every Wednesdays we have to transport them. We don't pay any tuition fees, which is good. It's less budget for us, because we don't have any primary sponsor or funder. So we transport them to these private schools where they are given tuition free of charge. So we go for these partnerships so that they become exposed. As Linda have said, we've got what we call African time. If something starts at 6, it's actually going to be starting at 7.
Or 8. Or 9.
But we've come to learn why we say half 6 for 7. But for anyone who does not have any budget for some drinks at that 6:30, people are only going to pitch up at 8. So these are new things that we're sort of exposing people from our communities to adjust to, in a friendly way, of course. We had a partnership with a diving team that wanted us to transport kids to be taught in diving. And the question was, well, how do you teach someone to dive if they cannot swim? And the club says, now we're a diving team, but we will be happy to work with you. But at least if you could find another club that could teach these kids to swim, then later on, after next year, they'll come to you. Eventually, the team had to change their mindset, because these kids are from the township. They're not exposed to swimming. They may be 12 years old, but they have never exposed to any swimming lessons. But we are able to change these other places to sort of think differently. When you want, if you say, I want to help, you cannot help someone that you don't understand. You cannot. Well, sometimes to these violin classes and guitars, there's a show, end of the year performance. If we don't provide transport for those kids' parents, the parents won't pitch up. They are unlike the other kids that they are teaching in those schools, where parents will drive in their own vehicles. So these are some of the things that simply, I would say, take away from the main budget that we have, because we would love to show the parents what have we been doing with their own kids. But if you don't provide that transport, parents don't pitch up. It's not that they don't care. It's a choice of, I've got 10 rand to go to town and watch that. It's going to cost me, let's say, $10 to go there and come back. But where will I get bread tomorrow? How am I going to feed this kid? Where is this child going to get the lunchbox tomorrow? From the same $10. So parents have those choices to make, so they're trapped. So we have to tell these partners that are sort of exposed to one life that, listen, if you want to help, you need to understand where these kids come from, so that you do not become frustrated when things don't happen the way they normally happen in the society where you come from. So in a way, slowly people are starting to come on board, not just to say, I want to help. Get to understand them. When you understand them, you'll be able to push them up. But if you don't just want to transfer a skill, they don't come from family backgrounds where they are taught ABC from birth. Most of them are raised by grandparents and single parents.
It's very complicated.
Fantastic. I want to thank you both, Linda and Rebecca, for coming here and telling us your story. I also want to thank the Moody Foundation for starting this, letting us start this series. And our goal is to bring people forward who are doing something in the public sphere some form of philanthropy, which literally means love of mankind. We're trying to make a difference, and we're acting out of deep commitments and values because we believe that strong philanthropy, effective philanthropy, has to start with a deep commitment and a set of real values. And one thing you've really laid out tonight is the power and value of forgiveness and reconciliation. So I want to thank you both for coming to Austin and kicking off the Moody Lecture Series. Thank you very much.
Thank you.